Was it really the ad that has absolutely collapsed Canada and US trade talks? Maybe. Or is it other residual hangovers from previous governments that's making the US government irate? Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. So the the talks between Canada and the US have just collapsed. But
Mhm.
I want to sort of point out, Brian, one sort of interesting, funny moment between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump at the APEC summit. The two men were sitting at a dinner table and they were holding up the pew pew, the gun gestures at each other.
I
Okay, is that
I
a
I
good sign?
I think that's fantastic, though, Adrian. I think that's the type of thing that we need between the two leaders, and for them to get past all this,
Okay.
Trump seems to like Carney.
And that's positive, Lori, that the president does actually, I think, personally like the prime minister. But let's talk about why we got to where we are now. Again, I feel we've had this conversation many times in the past 8 months, but here we are again, and the president had his fit last week. He said it was that ad from the Ontario government. Then we find out that the prime minister's office actually did see the ad. So this issue between Carney and Ford may not be such a big deal that Carney sanctioned it. I don't know. But why would he? Why would the prime minister want the various provinces freelancing now on trade talks when he was trying to push national unity on it?
Well, Carney has said that the talks were going well on sectoral tariffs, meaning like steel, aluminum, and energy, and that it blew up in the time frame because of the Ford ad. Ford, as you note on the other hand, says that Carney and his chief of staff saw the ad before it ran. Then Carney is asked, "Is that true?" And they kind of fudge it. So I'm not sure what's going on there exactly, but I would say that absent the two guns, it's not good. I mean, look what we're obsessing about. We're obsessing about an ad by Ontario that quoted Reagan accurately, and that had been around, that had been circulating for 2 weeks, and that Trump had said if it was him, he would have done the same thing. Then he explodes. The Reagan, whatever they are, foundation reveals they have no understanding of fair comment. They have no understanding of that. No, if a president gives a speech on the public record, it's on the public record. So my thing is always, how does this get us closer to a deal? And what I'd say is that the absence of substantial information about how those negotiations are going, because all we hear from Carney and company is, well, the negotiations are going. I know they can't reveal the minutia, but we have no idea how they're going. That paralyzes the opposition. I mean, you can play, well, the opposition doesn't know what's going and they're complaining. Well, no, they don't know because Carney is not doing his job of informing Parliament, not just Liberal MPs, but Parliament, and thus the Canadian people, of where things stand. He asks for, or he gets prime time to make, a major, what we thought was a major announcement, repeats everything he said during the election with nothing new. And just on the record, look where we've gone from. Carney started with dollar for dollar tariffs, then realized or acknowledged, well, that's crazy. Their economy's 10 times as big as ours. So then it became tariffs that will damage the Americans the most and Canadians the least. And then what happens? They've all been removed because tariffs imposed by Canada on the United States hurt Canadians, raises the price of goods and services. Then, as Brian has observed, there was going to be a deal. Canada had a deadline, July 21st. We're getting down to, no, that goes by. Then it's August 1st. That goes by. And now he's saying that, and then at one point he said, look, we're not going to get all these tariffs, this new wave of tariffs removed. Then he said that a lot of these tariffs will still be around even after the negotiation next year on the whole Canada-U.S. trade deal. So unless there's something there that I don't understand, What we're getting is a steadily drip of bad news that this thing is going to go on. It's going to go on indefinitely. And as long as it's going on, it's going to depress our economy.
Brian, you had broken a story this week where you had a lot of interesting nuggets of information about what was going on behind the scenes from the on the diplomatic level. Let's unpack a little bit of that, because I think that gives some more context about how much this relationship has degraded.
So in the column where I broke the story about Pete Hoekstra berating with F-bombs, Ontario's trade representative in Washington, David Patterson, well, the Globe and CBC and others followed that part, but they didn't have the other interesting nuggets that help inform where we really are. And so Lorrie was saying we don't know where the talks are. At this reception, the Canadian American Business Council State of the Relationship event, the relationship's in bad shape, guys. Dominic LeBlanc is giving a VIP reception background talk, a fireside chat about where things are at. And what he told this small select crew, many of whom I've spoken to and got details on it, was that talks had really broken down over the summer. And we've heard that before, the July 1st. Well, they were telling me back in June that beginning of June, it was imminent, and they keep missing dates and they keep putting it out there. Well, after things blew up in August, and I believe that was over Canada making the unilateral statement that we would recognize a Palestinian state, along with other things, there was nothing happening. The talks were dead. They were going nowhere for months until the October 7th second White House visit. And at that event, Trump told his officials, his staff, his team, go get a deal with Canada. Things are going well. So talks pick up from there, October 7th. They fell apart, 2 weeks later? Things were apparently moving along, but they weren't quite there yet. LeBlanc said the deal was not ready to sign. We've heard that it was ready to sign. They were going to sign it in ASEAN in Kuala Lumpur. He said, no, we weren't quite there yet, particularly with the numbers. What do the numbers mean? Could be quotas, could be what Lorrie was talking about a moment ago, this idea that we're not going to get rid of all the tariffs. Since February, when I was in Washington, I've been hearing Americans talk about a 10% baseline tariff on everything, that this will be the new normal. Mark Carney alluded to, we're not going to get rid of all these tariffs. So that was what was happening. Now, what happened between the Tuesday when Donald Trump said he would take out the same ad if he were Canada, and Thursday when he freaked out, to add more to the equation here, White House officials found out that Canada was not only threatening to sue GM and Stellantis over business decisions they made, they also were informed that Canada is now tariffing our vehicles that come in from the United States, even if they're CUSMA compliant. Well, the Americans aren't doing that to us. And so we're escalating tariffs on them in the middle of these talks. It's like back in June when talks were going on and the Americans said, hey, look, you've got this digital services tax coming in on July 1st. Can you just pause that while we continue our talks? And we said, no, we're going to increase taxes that you really hate in the middle of talks where we're trying to get tariffs taken off. So we are often our own worst enemy. And it appears that that's part of what was there. And finding out that this happened, that the White House officials were angry at these actions by Industry Minister Melanie Joly, made sense of a statement made days earlier by Kevin Hassett, Trump's National Economic Council director. He said, it's not just the ads, there's growing frustrations. One of the reporters said, what kind of frustrations with Canada? And he said, well, they're difficult. And, there's some leftovers from the Trudeau folks that have weird behaviors. Ding, ding, ding. Melanie Joly imposing tariffs on American goods that they're not tariffing on us. That helped set off Trump, and the ad became the excuse.
We can criticize President Trump. Lorrie, there's plenty to say there. There's a whole body of work there. But he's managed to negotiate and get deals signed just within the last few days with arguably some of the more difficult countries. He's signed with Malaysia. He signed a deal with South Korea, Cambodia, and now the big one, China. And this, some of the details that we know are the things that Trump campaigned on against China. Now the deals are signed, yet Canada is so other. My point is that other countries are able to navigate this. I know the relationship and the purely out of demographics and proximity. Canada is a unique situation, but Mexico is able to negotiate with them. Isn't the question to Prime Minister Carney what has changed and why isn't he being transparent about it? Why isn't there some information to the Canadian people? We find all this stuff out through the United States. When Donald Trump is picked off in the middle of the night and he puts a Truth Social out, that's how the Canadian people are finding out about this lack of ability to negotiate with Canada.
Yeah, well, look, let's go back to what Carney promised during the election. He was the best equipped to make a deal. That's what he said. He said that Poilievre, the conservative leader, he would basically grovel and kiss the ring, and you can't negotiate with somebody when you're groveling before them. I go right back to the beginning of the response of a lot of these countries to tariffs. The vast majority of them, save for China, didn't impose counter tariffs. The only countries that did impose counter tariffs, China, which has the heft to do it. The difference with China is they can do things that damage the American economy, right? The only other country was Canada. And that was all. Remember that all of this was happening in the pound our chest, elbows up, Mike Myers, we're going to win, blah, 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 blah. All of that to me was damaging. It was what the Liberals always do. They find a trick during an election to focus voters on things that, while important, were secondary. In other words, the main problem I think we have in making a deal goes back to the fact that we entered the deal with a weak economy. Who said we entered the deal with a weak economy? Mark Carney said that when he was running for the Liberal leadership. And he attributed it to two things. One was that the government, well, there was a lot of things, but specifically, the government lost control of immigration. When you lose control of immigration, and when immigration is increasing at a faster rate than the growth of the economy, then what happens is the standard of living for all Canadians goes down. And the other one he talked about was that the government had lost control of the operational costs of the government. It was going up. At the time, he said 9% a year. More recently, over 5 years, more recently, he said during the time of the Trudeau government, 7% a year. Again, way above the economic growth of the country. And so, to me, the problem we have is that we were in a weak position to begin with. And therefore, I don't think we have the cards to play that other countries do. And also, as Brian says, we're doing things that, the Americans didn't do to, look, Trump started it. Yes, he's the lunatic. Yeah, got that. But we got to deal with reality, right? And then as for Canada, like Carney was happy, remember, when all the premiers were sitting around, we're all united, we're going to deal with this, we're going to lower those barriers to trade. Look at the situation today. The premier is the head of the government. You've got Ford fighting with Alberta and Saskatchewan about the issue of the 100% tariffs we put on Chinese automobiles, right? And and then China said, look, if you get rid of the 100% tariff on our EVs, we'll back off on the canola tariffs, right? Ford says no. For obvious reasons, Manitoba and Saskatchewan say, no, that's a good deal because we have a lot of canola, right? Then you have Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith saying she's happy that Ontario took off that act. And Ford says in response, my auto sector's under insult. I have to do something. Eby is now saying he's going to do negative ads. So we're not speaking with one voice. And I find it astounding. That okay, the chance to go to do these other deals are fine and to travel around, but why is the prime minister out of the country days before one of the most consequential budgets we're ever going to have in Canadian history? Isn't he I don't understand that, because now they're coming out of the brass tacks. The last, what are we going to do? What do we need to do? Da, da, da. It's got to be austerity, but it's got to be growth. Blah blah blah. And he's out of. I don't understand. I don't understand his priorities. I really don't.
Well, now you have a sense of just why the US Canada trade talks have degraded to the point in which they are. And it doesn't seem like it's going to improve anytime soon. Well, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you'll not find anywhere else.